Breaking into Clint Eastwood's house? Bad idea. The moonlight bathed Beverly Hills in a soft glow, casting long shadows on the quiet streets. It was the kind of night where nothing seemed out of place. Silent, peaceful. But inside a grand estate perched on a hill, something wasn't right. Clint Eastwood, now 94, sat in his study, nursing a glass of scotch. The walls around him told the story of a life well lived, movie posters, golden trophies, relics of an era where he was the man villains feared on screen. But tonight, reality was creeping in, and Clint's instincts, those razor-sharp instincts that had made him a legend, were whispering something wasn't right. A flicker on the security monitor. A shift in the silence. Clint narrowed his eyes. He had faced outlaws, assassins, and crooked sheriffs in his time, but tonight, the threat was real. A black van idled just a few streets away. Inside, 3 men exchanged confident smirks. Marco, the mastermind, Tony, the tech guy, and Luis, the muscle. They had their plan locked in: sneak in, grab whatever was valuable, and slip away. Easy money. Old guy like him? Marco chuckled. Probably asleep by now. Luis cracked his knuckles. This'll be a walk in the park. They had no idea, because when you step onto Clint Eastwood's turf, you'd better be ready for war. The black van rolled closer, its tires whispering against the pavement. Inside, the air buzzed with overconfidence. We get in, grab the goods, and get out, Marco said, his voice cold and certain. The old man won't know what hit him. Tony, tapping his sleek hacking device, smirked. Security system's gonna be a joke. Luis, the muscle, cracked his neck. Hope he's got something worth our time. They weren't just here for valuables, they were here for trophies, Clint's awards, memorabilia, pieces of his legend. And they thought, who's gonna stop them? But inside the estate, Clint was already listening. The soft creak of leather as he set his glass down, the faint hum from his security monitor, a brief flicker on the screen. It was small, almost nothing, but Clint felt it. Something was off. His eyes, sharp as ever, narrowed. He muttered, his hand drifting to a familiar companion, an old baseball bat leaning by the door. It was worn, smooth from years of use, but tonight it wasn't nostalgia. It was preparation. Outside, the burglars made their move. The gate hacked open in seconds. The security cameras disabled without a hitch. Tony chuckled. Told you. Piece of cake. But as they slipped inside, their boots sinking into the estate's plush pathways, they failed to notice something critical. The lights in the house hadn't flickered out. They had been cut. By Clint. The burglars were inside, but so was something else. The man, the legend, and the fight of their lives. The burglars moved like shadows, their steps muffled on the polished floors. Marco led the way, his eyes sweeping over the grandeur of Clint Eastwood's home, towering shelves of awards, framed posters from Dirty Harry and Unforgiven, and memorabilia worth a fortune. Focus, Marco hissed. We're here for the valuables, not a museum tour. But something was off. The silence felt too heavy. Luis, gripping his crowbar, muttered, Man, this place feels weird. Tony, scanning with his flashlight, scoffed. Relax, the old man's probably snoring upstairs. But Clint wasn't upstairs. He was hunting. Moving through the house with a predator's grace, Clint's eyes flicked between the burglars' shadows on the walls and the faint echoes of their footsteps. His mind, sharp from decades of playing heroes and villains, calculated their every move. A creak from the dining room. Clint smirked. They're sloppy. With swift precision, he began his plan. Trap 1. Light bulbs unscrewed. The hallway ahead would be a corridor of darkness. Trap 2. Doors locked, creating dead ends. Trap 3. Trophies on the staircase, Trip hazards, perfectly placed. This wasn't a home anymore. It was his battlefield. First strike, the dining room clash. Luis smashed open a glass case, greedily pocketing collectible coins and an old, dirty Harry revolver prop. "This'll sell big," he sneered. From the shadows, Clint's voice, cold as iron, cut through the darkness. "Reckless move, kid. That piece has history, and so do I." Luis spun around, flashlight shaking. "Who's there?" Before he could react, clang! His crowbar flew from his hands, knocked aside by Clint's bat. "You should have stayed outside," Clint growled. Luis stumbled back, his bravado shattered. "Marco! He's here!" Divide and conquer. Marco and Tony sprinted from the hallway. "He's one guy!" Marco barked. "Get him!" But the house had turned against them. Tony hit a dead end, locked doors where there should have been a hallway. Luis tripped, crashing hard on the stairs, trophies clattering around him. And suddenly, darkness. The power killed from the breaker. "Marco!" Tony's voice trembled in the pitch black. "He's everywhere!" The study showdown. Tony, desperate, broke into the study, the heart of Clint's home. His flashlight fell on treasures, Oscars, vintage film reels, and a locked cabinet. "Jackpot," he whispered, his hands trembling as he worked the lock. But then, a voice from the shadows. Low, steady, deadly. "You're in my house," Clint said, his silhouette filling the doorway. "You should have stayed out of my study." Tony's eyes widened. "Hey, man, let's talk." But Clint didn't talk. With a sudden move, he struck. Crack! Knocking the flashlight from Tony's hand. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the sound of Tony's terrified breath. The hunters become the prey. Marco, separated from his crew, felt the walls closing in. "Luis! Tony!" he called, his voice cracking. No answer, only Clint's cold, steady voice, somewhere in the shadows. "Scared? Good. You should be." A floorboard creaked. Marco spun around, knife in hand. "You're just an old man," he yelled. But Clint's reply came through the darkness, firm and cold. "Yeah, but I'm Clint Eastwood." Tension peaks. They're cornered. The trio, bruised and broken, finally regrouped, backs to the wall in the grand living room, their confidence shattered. Their flashlights flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows. Luis, shaking, raised the stolen revolver. "Stay back!" But Clint stepped into the dim light, bat on his shoulder, eyes sharp and unflinching. "That's not loaded, kid," he said, voice laced with cold certainty. "And even if it was, you wouldn't have the guts." Final challenge set. The battle's not over. "You've got one chance," Clint warned, his voice like a loaded gun. "Walk or regret." But Marco, bloodied and desperate, sneered. "No, you'll regret it, old man." And with that, the final showdown was set. Because tonight, justice wasn't in a badge or a courtroom. It was in the hands of Clint Eastwood. The tension in the room felt like a stretched wire, ready to snap. Marco's knuckles were white around his knife. Luis's trembling hands clutched the stolen revolver. Tony's breath was shallow, his eyes darting for an escape. But Clint Eastwood? He was still, calm, eyes cold as steel. "You boys sure picked the wrong house," he said, his voice low and sharp. "But don't worry. You'll remember tonight for the rest of your lives." The first strike, Marco versus Clint. With a snarl, Marco lunged, knife flashing in the dim light. But Clint, even at 94, was faster than they expected. He pivoted, and crack! The baseball bat met Marco's wrist. The knife flew from his hand, clattering to the floor. Marco collapsed to his knees, clutching his arm, his face twisted in pain. "Ah, you—" But Clint cut him off, his voice sharp as the bat he gripped. "First mistake? Thinking I was some frail old man?" The revolver standoff. Luis versus Clint. Luis, panicked, raised the revolver with shaking hands. I swear, I'll shoot, he stammered, his voice cracking. Clint's gaze, cold and unflinching, locked on him. That's a movie prop, son, he said, his voice low and menacing. But I've fired the real thing more times than you've had hot meals. The room froze. Then Clint stepped forward. One step. Then another. And Luis's hand, shaking, sweating, lowered. The revolver slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a cold clink. I'm sorry, Luis stammered, his voice barely a whisper. We didn't know. The final move, Tony's desperate escape. Tony, the tech guy, the youngest, the most scared, bolted for the front door. I'm out, he screamed. But before his hand reached the doorknob, thwack! The bat slammed into the door frame, splintering wood and blocking his path. Clint's voice, calm as ever. You ain't going anywhere, kid. Tony, chest heaving, turned back, face pale, eyes wide. Please. Just let me go. Clint's verdict. The three men, bruised, battered, and broken, stood cornered. Their arrogance was gone, their confidence shattered. Clint, his bat now resting on his shoulder, delivered his final words. You made 2 mistakes tonight. He pointed at Marco, who still cradled his broken wrist. First, you thought I was just some old man. Then, his eyes swept over all 3 of them. Second, you stepped into my house. A heavy pause, their fate hanging in the air. Then, the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Police! A voice boomed from outside. Come out with your hands up! Justice served. Luis collapsed to his knees, hands raised. I'm done! Marco, seething and humiliated, spat. This isn't over! But Clint, his eyes still cold, replied, Oh, it's over. Just not for you. The cops'll handle the rest. The front door burst open. Officers swarmed in, weapons drawn. Freeze! The burglars, beaten and broken, surrendered without a fight. One officer, recognizing the man standing tall and calm with a bat in hand, lowered his weapon in awe. Mr. Eastwood? Clint, his voice as steady as his grip on the bat, replied simply, They're all yours, boys. Resolution, the legend grows. As the police cuffed the intruders, one officer turned to Clint. You okay, sir? Clint, his lips curling into a faint smirk, replied, I'm fine. They're the ones you should be worried about. The officer shook his head, clearly impressed. At 94, you still got it. Mr. Eastwood. Clint's eyes, sharp and unbreakable, met his. Age is just a number, he said, voice gravelly but proud. What matters is what's in here. He tapped his chest once. And that never fades. Morning headlines. The next day, the world buzzed with the news. 94-year-old Clint Eastwood defends his home. Burglars regret it instantly. His name once again in the spotlight, not for a movie, but for a legend. The final moment. Clint sat back in his study, the house quiet once more. The scars of the battle, broken glass, upturned furniture, surrounded him. But he didn't see damage. He saw victory. His old baseball bat rested beside his chair, and for the first time that night, he smiled. Because the message was clear. You don't mess with Clint Eastwood. If you love this story, there's more where that came from. Hit subscribe to Prime Tales and join us for more legendary stories you'll never forget.